Hey everyone, Julian Cross here, ready to decode some regulations with you on Regulation Rangers.
And I'm Elena Harper, here to help make sense of it all.
We've got a whole mountain of new regs to sort through today.
A real whirlwind tour, everything from flax insurance to, you guessed it, security at the border.
It always amazes me how these seemingly random rules end up impacting, well, pretty much everything.
Absolutely, the ripple effects are fascinating. Industries, businesses, even individuals, you never know what'll get touched.
Okay, let's jump right in. First up, we've got the Bureau of Industry and Security.
Ah, the BIS.
And they're issuing a correction to the Commerce Control List. You know, in my head, I always picture that list as this, top secret document locked away in a vault somewhere.
You're not too far off, actually. It's essentially a catalog of all those sensitive technologies and materials the government keeps tabs on.
Sensitive, huh? So what are we talking about here? Robot armies? Laser beams?
Not quite that exciting. Think more along the lines of advanced manufacturing tech.
Okay, like what?
3D printing, certain types of lasers, even some software used for design and manufacturing of, sensitive equipment.
Makes sense. So less sci-fi, more real-world impact.
Exactly. And even a small error on this list can have huge implications.
Or
international trade, for one, could even put sensitive tech at risk if it falls into the wrong hands. The BIS constantly updates this list, trying to stay ahead of both technological advancements and, global security concerns.
Gotcha. So a little tweak to the list can have major consequences. Next up, the Coast Guard's setting up some temporary safety zones.
For fireworks.
Ah, yes, fireworks. Spectacular, but definitely can be dangerous, especially around water.
Exactly. That's where the Coast Guard steps in, managing boat traffic, making sure everyone can enjoy the show safely.
So these zones, they're mainly for when fireworks are launched from, barges on the water.
Especially then, yeah. Adds another layer of complexity.
Smart move. Speaking of safety, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, they've been busy with Regulation C. That's the home mortgage disclosure one, right?
That's the one.
Seems like they're giving smaller banks and credit unions a bit of a break here.
They are. Raise the asset size exemption threshold. It's now $58 million. Meaning smaller institutions, those with assets below that threshold, they don't have to deal with certain data reporting requirements on mortgages.
Oh, so less paperwork for them.
Less paperwork, more resources freed up to actually serve their customers and communities.
Smart move. I'm all for less paperwork. All right, next up, the Department of Agriculture.
They've been looking at grain.
Grain, as in wheat and corn and stuff.
The very same. They've revised the fees for grain inspection services.
Now, I know everything's getting more expensive these days, but grain inspection, really?
Might seem like a small thing, but it's actually super important.
Quality.
Quality and safety of our grain exports. We have a reputation to uphold,
Right, of course. So is this fee hike just about covering the cost of those inspections?
Pretty much. The Federal Grain Inspection Service, FGIS for short, they need to cover their operational costs. But they're also trying to minimize the impact on the grain industry, especially smaller producers.
So it's a balancing act.
Always is.
Yeah.
These new fees, they're carefully calibrated to be fair and reflect the actual cost of providing those services.
Now, this next one caught my eye. The Department of Education.
They've had a change of heart.
It seems so. They've withdrawn those proposed rules about assistance for states in educating kids with disabilities.
That one stirred up a lot of controversy.
You sure did.
The initial proposal was about clarifying parental consent, you see, for using public benefits like Medicaid for educational services under IDEA.
IDEA. That's the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act.
Exactly. But there were concerns that the new rule could actually create more barriers to getting those essential services.
Potentially even jeopardizing the well-being of the students.
That was the worry.
So by withdrawing the rule, the department's basically saying, okay, back to the drawing board.
Pretty much. They're acknowledging the complexity of this issue, and they're going to look for alternative approaches. Ones that balance those parental rights with the very real need to make sure students with disabilities get the support they deserve.
Okay, makes sense. Now, for a topic that's probably pretty relatable to anyone who's ever done laundry, dishwashers and washing machines.
The never-ending cycle.
Good one. The Department of Energy's withdrawn those short-cycle classifications for appliances like those.
Seems they decided those labels weren't really necessary.
Why not? Love a good quick wash.
Well, the DOE, they figured existing energy standards are already doing a good job
Yeah.
making sure these appliances are efficient, even on shorter cycles.
So no more quick washes.
Not at all. Manufacturers can still offer them as long as they meet those broader energy and water consumption standards. It's about finding that balance, between convenience and our environmental impact.
Right. So maybe not the end of quick washes, but definitely good news for the planet. Okay, next up we have the Department of Homeland Security, and they're delaying the effective date for the security bars rule.
This one's been a hot topic.
Definitely controversial.
It was finalized earlier this year, aimed at restricting asylum eligibility for some non-citizens during public health emergencies.
I see. So tying public health to immigration.
Yeah.
And what's causing the delay?
A few things. Operational challenges, for one. And the DHS wants more time to really evaluate the rule's impact. Plus, they got a lot of public feedback, a lot of concerns about fairness and, well, unintended consequences. It's a really complex area, where public health and immigration policy collide.
Lots to unpack there. Let's move on to the Department of Justice.
They're clarifying some things.
They've issued a clarification about, well, bars to eligibility during credible fear and reasonable fear reviews for asylum seekers. That's a mouthful. Can you break that down for us?
Imagine you're fleeing persecution. You come to the U.S. seeking asylum.
A terrifying situation.
Absolutely. One of the first hurdles you face is proving you have a real credible fear of going back home.
Makes sense.
This clarification from the DOJ, it's all about making sure those reviews are fair. That immigration judges look at everything, all the factors and bars to eligibility, not just the ones the asylum officer initially brings up.
So it's a safeguard, making sure no one slips through the cracks, everyone gets their case heard properly.
Exactly. A really important protection in a system where, quite literally, lives hang in the balance.
Absolutely. Okay, switching gears a bit now. The Department of Labor has withdrawn a proposed rule.
On apprenticeships, the one about enhancing the national apprenticeship system.
Right, I remember that one. Seemed like they were all about making those programs stronger. Why the change of plans?
They are. But they want to get it right.
Meaning?
The initial proposal, it aimed to really bolster those programs, offer more worker protections, but after hearing from employers and the program sponsors, there were concerns. Potential burdens, unintended consequences, so they're hitting pause, taking a step back.
Back to the drawing board.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Okay, let's clear the air a bit.
Sounds good to me.
We've got the EPA finalizing revisions to a couple of state air plans, Washington and Colorado.
Always lots going on with air quality.
For Washington, it seems like the focus is on controlling those excess emissions. When industrial facilities are starting up, shutting down, or malfunctioning.
Right. Those are the tricky times. Lots of potential for pollution to spike.
So the EPA's given the thumbs up to updates in Washington's plan, trying to minimize emissions during those crucial periods.
Exactly. Reduce the impact on air quality and ultimately protect public health.
Makes sense. What about Colorado?
For Colorado, it's more about streamlining.
Less is more.
Sometimes. The EPA approved removing some sections from their Common Provisions regulation. Simplifies things without weakening those air quality standards.
Efficiency and environmental protection, two birds, one stone.
You got it.
Now, this next one piqued my interest. The FAA is getting rid of a medical certificate requirement.
For some check pilots and instructors.
Specifically, the ones who aren't actually serving as flight crew.
Right. The FAA figured the requirement wasn't really adding much in terms of safety for those folks.
So less red tape?
Less red tape. Allows those experienced pilots to share their expertise without jumping through unnecessary hoops.
A win for the aviation industry and for anyone who loves flight training. Now, calling all farmers, the Federal Crop Insurance Corporation has some news for you.
They're expanding coverage.
Revenue coverage for flax is being introduced, and they're expanding options for specialty crops.
Big news for farmers, especially those growing those specialty crops that haven't always been covered.
So what does this mean for the flax farmers out there? Why is this such a big deal?
Well, flax, it's in everything these days. Linen, linseed oil, even nutritional supplements.
For subtle stuff.
But it's vulnerable. Price fluctuations, bad weather, all sorts of things can impact the yield. This revenue coverage, it gives those farmers a safety net.
A little peace of mind.
Exactly. Helps them keep growing that valuable crop. And for specialty crops, things like fruits, veggies, nuts, even nursery plants, it's all about encouraging diversification.
So a wider variety of crops being grown.
That's the goal. Helping farmers manage risk, try new things, and ultimately leads to a more diverse and resilient food system. Good for everyone, really.
Okay, on to a couple of quick corrections from the FCC. They've made some tweaks to the Connect America Fund and EDGAR filer access.
Technical stuff, but important nonetheless.
I'm sure. I'll admit I'm not a telecom expert, but I know these things can get pretty complex. Remind me, what exactly is the Connect America Fund?
It's all about broadband. Expanding broadband access to those rural and underserved communities, super important work. And EDGAR, that's the system companies use to file those required documents with the SEC.
Okay, so are these corrections just about, like, making sure those systems are running smoothly?
Pretty much. Even small errors in these regulations can have a big impact, so it's all about maintaining that accuracy, transparency, and making sure everything's flowing smoothly.
Smoothly is good.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, now for something that's probably on a lot of people's minds, asbestos.
The FDA's been busy.
They've come out with some new guidelines for asbestos in those talc-containing cosmetic products.
Big focus on consumer safety there, for sure.
Asbestos, that's some serious stuff. Yeah. Even small amounts can be dangerous, right?
Absolutely, it's a known carcinogen.
So the FDA is really stepping up their game to make sure these products are safe for everyone to use.
They're committed to protecting consumers from harmful ingredients in cosmetics. These new guidelines are all about making sure those products are thoroughly tested. And they've also been working on something else.
Oh.
They came out with a new definition of healthy for food labeling. Remember the old one?
Vaguely. Seemed like almost anything could be labeled healthy back then.
That's the problem. This new definition, it's much more aligned with current nutritional science. It looks at the overall nutritional value of a food, not just the fat or sugar content.
A more holistic approach.
Exactly. More transparency, more informed choices for consumers. Plus, it encourages manufacturers to actually create healthier products. A win-win, really.
Okay, last but not least, we've got the General Services Administration, and they've been busy with the GSR.
The General Services Administration Acquisition Regulation.
Right, that's the one. They've issued a correction. Seems they found some inaccuracies in those OMB control numbers.
Important to get those details right.
I'll admit this one sounds a bit, well, dry, even for me. Can you remind me, what exactly does the GSR do?
It governs how federal agencies buy things. Goods and services, the whole 9 yards.
Ah, so it's all about government spending. Makes sense.
It's a massive document, lots of moving parts. Even small errors can cause big problems with compliance and efficiency. These corrections, they're just about making sure everything's accurate, transparent, and that taxpayer money is being spent responsibly.
Okay, I can get behind that. Now, let's wrap things up with the National Marine Fisheries Service.
Always something happening under the sea.
They've made some adjustments to the catch limits for certain fish in Alaska, specifically Pacific cod.
It's all about sustainability. The NMFS, they manage our fisheries, and that means setting those catch limits to prevent overfishing.
So are they increasing or decreasing the cod limits?
Increasing them, actually. The latest stock assessment shows a healthy cod population, so they've adjusted those limits accordingly. Different sectors of the fishing fleet have their own quotas, ensuring everyone gets a fair share.
While still protecting the fish for the future.
That's the goal. Balance the needs of the industry with the long-term health of those ecosystems.
Okay, time for a bit of a brain teaser. You got it. The Department of Treasury has issued a correction, and it involves Section 897 of the Internal Revenue Code. If you're not a tax lawyer, your eyes are probably glazing over right now.
It's not exactly light reading, that's for sure.
But it does affect a lot of people, right?
It does, especially those dealing with foreign investment in U.S. real estate. That's what Section 897 is all about. This correction, it's clarifying the definition of, get ready for it, domestically controlled qualified investment entities.
Whoa, that's a mouthful. Can we translate that into plain English?
Basically, it's about making sure foreign investors who meet certain criteria are being taxed fairly and consistently. No surprises, no unintended consequences. Keeps the U.S. real estate market attractive to those international investors.
Okay, level playing field. Got it. Back to the EPA now. They've been busy bees.
They have. This time they've approved some updates to Indiana's air plan.
Isn't that kind of a regular thing?
It is. States have to update their plans periodically to stay aligned with federal regulations, keeps everything consistent and accurate.
So what's Indiana tweaking this time?
It's a bit technical, but basically they're updating references in their plan to the latest edition of the Code of Federal Regulations.
Ah, so it's like making sure they're using the latest playbook.
Exactly. Avoids confusion, keeps those regulations clear and enforceable, important for maintaining good air quality in Indiana.
Speaking of air quality, let's hop over to Kentucky. The EPA has been looking at Jefferson County and their rules on open burning.
Ah, yes, those backyard bonfires, agricultural
The
burns
smoky stuff.
can be quite the air polluter, contributing to smog and causing respiratory problems. These amendments to Jefferson County's rules, they're about tightening things up.
So less burning, cleaner air.
That's the idea. Encourage folks to find other ways to get rid of their waste, ways that are less harmful to both the environment and our lungs.
Smart move. Okay, back to telecom land. The FCC's issued a correction regarding the TRS fund.
Ah, yes, the Telecommunications Relay Service Fund. Vital for accessibility.
Remind me again, what does it do?
It helps make phone calls accessible for people with hearing or speech disabilities.
Right, right. So what's this correction about?
It's about the money, specifically how compensation is calculated for providers of something called Internet Protocol Captioned Telephone Service in California specifically.
So making sure those providing these essential services are being paid fairly.
That's a big part of it. And ensuring folks with disabilities have those reliable communication options.
Makes sense. Okay, let's take to the skies now. The FAA's issued a correction to a rule about drug and alcohol testing.
This one's for employees at those certificated aircraft repair stations, the ones located outside the U.S.
Interesting. So even if they're not on U.S. soil, they still have to follow our rules.
When it comes to aviation safety, you bet. This correction makes it crystal clear that these international repair stations have to comply with the FAA's drug and alcohol testing program. No exceptions.
Safety first, no matter where you are. All right, the NMFS is back with another update.
Those busy folks at the National Marine Fisheries Service.
They've been reallocating those Pacific cod fishing quotas up in the Gulf of Alaska. Always a hot topic up there.
It is, for sure. But this reallocation is based on solid science. The latest stock assessments show a healthy Pacific cod population.
So, more cod for everyone.
Well, within reason, the NMFS has adjusted catch limits for different parts of the fishing fleet, making sure those fishing opportunities are distributed fairly. Most importantly, though, it's about keeping that cod population sustainable.
A delicate balance.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take a deep breath and talk about air quality.
Always a good idea.
The EPA has put forth a proposal to revise the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. Now, this is a pretty big deal, right?
Huge. These standards set the limits for how much of certain pollutants can be in the air we breathe. Protecting public health, that's the goal.
Especially for those most vulnerable, like kids and the elderly.
Exactly. So the EPA, they're taking a look at some key pollutants. Oxides of nitrogen, oxides of sulfur, particulate matter, the whole gang. They're digging into the latest scientific evidence to see if those current standards are still tough enough.
So it's a checkup, making sure those standards are still doing their job. And if they're not,
then it's time for an upgrade. We've made progress on air quality, but there's always more to do.
Never a bad time to breathe easier. Okay, let's revisit taxes one more time. The Department of Treasury has issued another clarification, again related to Section 897 of the Internal Revenue Code.
Foreign investment in U.S. real estate, round 2.
Round 2 it is. This time it's about those domestically controlled qualified investment entities. Still sounds like alphabet soup to me.
I hear you. But they're important for international investors. These DCQIEs, they're often used to hold U.S. real estate. This clarification gives clearer guidance on how to figure out if an entity qualifies as domestically controlled.
So avoiding confusion and making sure those tax rules are applied consistently.
Precisely. Transparency and predictability are key when it comes to taxes, especially for those investing from overseas.
Okay, back to the EPA. They've given the green light to an update for Indiana's air plan.
Another routine update, but important nonetheless.
States got to keep those plans fresh.
They do. This one's about making sure Indiana's regulations on open burning are up to date. Keeps those rules clear, enforceable, and protective of both public health and the environment.
Now, for something a bit closer to home, literally, open burning in Jefferson County, Kentucky. The EPA's given final approval to some amendments there.
Those amendments are all about cleaner air for Jefferson County.
So less backyard burning, more eco-friendly ways to dispose of waste.
That's the goal. It's a win for the environment, a win for public health, and a great example of local communities taking action to improve air quality.
All right, one more FCC correction to tackle. This one's about the Connect America Fund and those reporting requirements for certain telecom carriers.
Dotting the I's and crossing the T's, making sure those funds are being used effectively.
And these clarifications are particularly important for carriers in Alaska and those participating in the Mobility Fund, right?
Those are the ones. Both programs are key for bringing broadband to those rural and underserved areas. These corrections, they just make sure the carriers have all the info they need to comply with those reporting requirements and access those crucial funds.
Keeping those broadband expansion efforts on track. All right, let's talk about something big. The SEC has announced a major modernization effort.
For EDGAR, that's their electronic filing system.
The one companies use to file all those required documents with the SEC. Big undertaking, I imagine.
It is, but much needed. EDGAR, it's the heart of financial transparency, providing that crucial data to investors and the public. These modernizations, they're all about making the system easier to use, more efficient, and more secure.
So, a smoother experience for everyone.
Exactly. Updating those EDGAR filer access and account management features, improving security, streamlining the whole electronic filing process. The SEC is really embracing technology to make things better for everyone.
Okay, let's move from the digital world to something a bit more, well, tangible. The EPA has issued some regulations concerning air pollution coming from sources on the outer continental shelf.
Off the coast of Massachusetts. Interesting one.
It is. Might seem far out, but those emissions can definitely impact coastal communities.
Absolutely. We're talking about things like offshore oil and gas platforms, wind farms, all those activities happening out at sea. These regulations set limits on those emissions, making sure they don't negatively impact those coastal areas.
Protecting the coast from afar. Now let's head over to Spokane, Washington.
The EPA has been reviewing their plans for those large municipal waste combustors.
Essential facilities, but yeah, they can be big polluters.
That's the dilemma. The EPA has taken a close look at Spokane's plan, and they've given it a partial disapproval. Basically, they're offering guidance on how Spokane can improve their controls.
So it's a collaboration, working together to make those facilities as clean and efficient as possible.
That's the spirit. It shows how the EPA and local authorities can team up to balance those essential services with the need to protect our air and our health.
Speaking of clear skies, let's talk about Florida. The EPA has been reviewing revisions to their regional haze plan.
Keeping those national parks and wilderness areas looking pristine?
Haze can really obscure those beautiful views.
It can. That's why the EPA has been working with Florida to strengthen their approach to controlling those emissions that cause haze. They've given the thumbs up to Florida's revisions, which focus on better monitoring and control measures.
So clearer skies ahead for Florida.
Hopefully. It's a good reminder that air pollution doesn't respect borders. Protecting those special places requires a regional effort.
Okay, back to the wild blue yonder. The FAA's proposed an airworthiness directive, and it's about those potential glide slope anomalies we discussed earlier.
Making sure landings are safe and smooth.
Those anomalies can really throw off a landing approach.
They can. Could cause a plane to veer off course, increasing the risk of an incident. So the FAA is taking action. This proposed directive would require inspections of certain Boeing aircraft. Got to make sure those glide slope systems are working properly, giving pilots accurate information during landing.
Better safe than sorry, especially when it comes to landing a plane. Okay, let's come back down to earth, literally. The Federal Crop Insurance Corporation has some good news for farmers.
More insurance options. Always a good thing.
They've introduced revenue coverage for flax and expanded options for specialty crops. Why is this such a big deal?
For flax farmers, it's huge. Flax, it's a valuable crop used in everything from clothing to food, but it's also vulnerable to all sorts of risks.
Price fluctuations, weather events, you name it.
Exactly. This revenue coverage, it provides a safety net, protecting farmers from those financial losses that are beyond their control. Lets them keep growing that flax with more confidence.
And for the specialty crop growers, what's the benefit?
Specialty crops, those are your fruits, veggies, nuts, all that good stuff. They often face unique challenges and risks. Expanding insurance options gives them more choices, more flexibility in managing those risks, encourages diversification, which ultimately leads to a stronger, more resilient food system.
Good for the farmers, good for our plates.
Yeah.
Now, for a topic that's been generating a lot of buzz, the Department of Homeland Security and their security bars rule.
Controversial, to say the least.
Designed to limit asylum eligibility during public health emergencies, but there have been a lot of concerns.
Many felt it was too restrictive, could unfairly impact those seeking refuge.
So what's the latest?
The DHS has announced a delay in the effective date of the rule. They're pumping the brakes, taking a bit more time to consider its impact.
A chance to address those concerns and make adjustments if needed.
Exactly. It's a complex issue, this intersection of public health and immigration. Finding that right balance, protecting our borders while upholding humanitarian principles, it's no easy feat.
Definitely a lot to consider. Okay, Moving on to the Department of Justice. They've issued a clarification regarding credible fear and reasonable fear reviews for asylum seekers.
Ensuring fairness in the asylum process, a crucial step.
Can you break down what this clarification is all about?
It's about making sure those seeking asylum get a fair hearing. Emphasis is on a thorough review process. Immigration judges need to consider all the relevant factors, all the potential bars to eligibility before making a decision. No shortcuts.
So protecting the rights of those who are most vulnerable.
Exactly. Those reviews, they're often the first hurdle in the asylum process, and the stakes are incredibly high. This clarification reaffirms the importance of due process, ensuring those decisions are made with careful consideration of all the facts.
Okay, now for an update on the world of apprenticeships.
The Department of Labor's made a decision about that proposed rule, the one about enhancing the national apprenticeship system.
They've withdrawn it. I thought expanding apprenticeships was a priority.
It is, but they want to make sure they get it right. The initial proposal, it aimed to strengthen those programs, offer more worker protections, the whole 9 yards. But after hearing feedback, they realized they needed to take another look.
Too many potential downsides.
Concerns about burdens, unintended consequences, things like that. So they're back to the drawing board, taking all that feedback into account, figuring out how to enhance the system without creating more problems than they solve.
A thoughtful approach.
Oh.
Okay, back to the EPA now. They've been busy reviewing state implementation plans. Colorado's air plan, specifically, has gotten some revisions.
Streamlining and clarifying, that's the name of the game.
Making those regulations more user-friendly.
You could say that. It's about finding that sweet spot, protecting the environment while minimizing unnecessary burdens. The EPA worked closely with Colorado on these revisions, making sure the state's plan is effective, efficient, and in line with federal requirements.
A good example of how federal and state agencies can work together to get things done. Now, let's talk about something that's probably on everyone's mind, especially with the holidays approaching. Food.
Time for some festive treats?
And speaking of treats, the FDA has given us a gift, a brand new definition of healthy for food labeling.
About time. That old definition, it was way outdated, didn't reflect current nutritional science at all.
So what's different now?
This new definition, it takes a broader view. It's not just about fat and sugar content anymore. It considers things like saturated fat, added sugars, sodium, and it also looks at the good stuff, those beneficial nutrients like fiber, protein, vitamins, all the things that make a food truly healthy.
So a more holistic approach, giving consumers a clearer picture of what's actually good for them.
Exactly. Empowers consumers to make better choices, and it nudges those food manufacturers to create healthier products. Everyone wins.
Okay, let's circle back to those FCC corrections. They've clarified some rules about compensation for providers of Internet Protocol captioned telephone service in California. A mouthful, I know.
But an important service for those with hearing or speech disabilities. This correction ensures those providers are fairly compensated for their work, keeping those communication options accessible and reliable.
Accessibility for everyone is key. And they've also clarified those drug and alcohol testing requirements for employees at certificated aircraft repair stations located outside the U.S.
Safety knows no borders. This clarification underscores that all repair stations, regardless of location, need to meet those FAA standards for drug and alcohol testing.
Maintaining those high standards across the board makes sense.
Okay, back to the depths of the ocean. The NMFS has announced another adjustment to the allowable catch amount for Pacific cod in the Gulf of Alaska. They've been keeping a close eye on those cod populations.
And the verdict is?
Good news. The latest assessments show a healthy cod population, which means they can handle a slight increase in the catch limit. So the NMFS has adjusted the quotas accordingly, making sure the fishing industry can thrive while ensuring the long-term health of those cod stocks.
Sustainability and economic prosperity hand in hand. And finally, let's wrap up with the EPA. They're reviewing the National Ambient Air Quality Standards.
The ones that set those limits on pollutants in the air we breathe. Super important for public health.
And this review, it's just about making sure those standards are still up to par.
Exactly. They're looking at the latest science, seeing if any tweaks are needed to keep those standards strong and protective, especially for those who are most vulnerable to the effects of air pollution. Kids, the elderly, folks with respiratory issues, they need that extra layer of protection.
Breathing easy should be a right, not a privilege. Okay, one more time into the world of taxes. The Department of Treasury has issued yet another correction.
They've been busy.
Section 897 of the Internal Revenue Code, back in the spotlight. This one, it's all about those domestically controlled qualified investment entities, again, those DCQIEs.
They keep popping up.
It's all about making sure foreign investors are on a level playing field, right?
That's the goal. Transparency and predictability, those are essential for attracting investment and promoting economic growth. This correction just irons out some wrinkles in the definition of those DCQIEs, ensuring those tax rules are being applied consistently and fairly.
Okay, makes sense. Back to the EPA for a quick update on Indiana's air plan.
Another routine update, making sure those regulations are in tip-top shape.
Specifically, they're updating references to the Code of Federal Regulations.
Keeping things accurate and aligned with the latest federal standards, essential for maintaining air quality and avoiding any confusion.
Now for something a bit more down to earth. Open burning in Jefferson County, Kentucky. The EPA's given those amendments the final seal of approval.
Good news for Jefferson County's air.
Less smoke and smog, more environmentally friendly ways to dispose of waste.
That's the takeaway. Communities taking action to breathe easier and protect their environment. Inspiring stuff.
All right, we've got one last FCC correction to cover. This one's about those Connect America Fund reporting requirements for certain telecom carriers.
Clarifying the rules, making sure everyone's on the same page.
And those clarifications are especially important for those carriers in Alaska and the ones participating in the Mobility Fund, right?
Those are the key players in bringing broadband to those underserved areas. These corrections ensure they have all the information they need to comply with those reporting requirements and access those essential funds that keep those broadband expansion efforts rolling.
Connecting the unconnected, that's the goal. And finally, the SEC is stepping into the digital age with a modernization of their EDGAR filing system.
Out with the old, in with the new.
Making it easier and more efficient for companies to file those required documents.
Exactly. Updating EDGAR filer access, improving account management features, boosting security, and streamlining that whole electronic filing process. The SEC is harnessing technology to make things smoother and more transparent for both companies and investors.
Whew. We've covered a lot of ground today. It seems like every agency's got their hands full, tweaking, revising, overhauling, you name it.
A real regulatory whirlwind. It can be hard to keep up, that's for sure.
But hey, that's what we're here for, right? Regulation Rangers to the rescue.
Absolutely. Breaking it all down, making sense of the jargon, and most importantly, showing how these rules, even the seemingly obscure ones, impact our everyday lives.
Because sometimes those connections aren't so obvious.
Right. Like we were talking about earlier, the EPA and those municipal waste combustors in Spokane.
Essential, yeah, but not exactly known for being eco-friendly.
Exactly. That whole back and forth, the EPA offering guidance, Spokane making adjustments, it's a perfect example of how local and national regulations intersect.
It takes a village, or in this case, multiple levels of government, to keep those emissions in check.
And on a larger scale, think about Florida's regional haze plan. Air quality, it doesn't stop at state lines.
Those national parks and wilderness areas, they need protection too, even from pollution originating miles away.
Exactly. It's all connected.
And just like the EPA's got their eye on the environment, the FAA's laser-focused on aviation safety.
No room for error when you're thousands of feet in the air.
And as technology evolves, those challenges become even more complex, like those glide slope anomalies, potentially throwing off a plane's landing approach.
Tricky stuff, but the FAA's on it, making sure those safety standards evolve right alongside those technological advancements.
Keeping us all safe, both on the ground and in the air.
And don't forget about the farmers.
Right. Those expanded insurance options for flax and specialty crops, that's a game changer.
Gives those farmers some much-needed peace of mind, allows them to take risks, try new things, and ultimately strengthens our entire food system.
More options, more diversity, better food for everyone. It's a win-win.
Absolutely. Well, I think we've given everyone a lot to chew on today. From agriculture to aviation, international trade to the ingredients in our cereal, it's clear that regulations touch every aspect of our lives.
And hopefully we've shed some light on how those rules work, why they matter, and how folks can stay informed.
Because knowledge is power. The more we understand these regulations, the better equipped we are to participate in the process, make our voices heard, and shape the rules that shape our world.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And remember, this is just a taste of what's out there. We encourage everyone to dive deeper into these topics on our website.
We've got detailed breakdowns of each regulation, expert analysis, all the resources you need to stay in the know.
So keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those brains engaged.
Because the world of regulations, it's always evolving.
That's it for us on Regulation Rangers. We'll catch you next time.